Imagine standing at a grave in the silence of a Korean autumn morning, the kind of morning where the air is so still, it feels like the world itself is holding its breath. You have done this every week for 3 years. You know the sound of the gravel under your shoes. You know which flowers the groundskeeper replaces on Tuesdays. You know the precise angle of the light when it hits the photograph on the headstone, and how, for just a few seconds each morning, your son seems almost alive inside that frame. Now imagine that on this particular morning, something is different. There are 2 small children standing at your son's grave, a boy and a girl, 3, maybe 4 years old. They are holding a single white chrysanthemum between them, the stem slightly bent because neither one wants to let go. And they are talking to the photograph, not crying, not afraid, just talking, the way children talk to things they don't yet understand they've lost. And then one of them turns, notices you standing there, and without hesitation, without any fear at all, looks you directly in the eye and asks 3 words. 3 words that will bring a man who has survived the death of his son, the collapse of his first marriage, and 30 years of ruthless business entirely to his knees. This is that story. If this is your first time here, welcome. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story. And when you're done watching, tell us in the comments. What would you have done if you were him? Min Seok-jung turned 63 in the spring, and he did not celebrate. There was a cake. His housekeeper, Mrs. Park, made one every year, chocolate with white icing, because it had been his son's favorite. But Min Seok ate exactly 1 slice and then returned to his study and did not come out until morning. He was not a man who felt sorry for himself. 63 years had given him an empire, construction, real estate, a logistics company that his grandfather had started with a single truck, and that Min Seok had grown into something that moved through 4 countries like a quiet, unstoppable tide. He had more money than he would ever spend. He had a penthouse in Seoul with a view that made guests go silent at the window. He had respect, influence, a name that opened doors before you even reached them. What he did not have was his son. Jae-won had died 3 years ago, in the first week of October, at 31 years old. An aggressive cardiac event, sudden, inexplicable in a young man who had never smoked, who ran half marathons, who ate well and slept enough and laughed easily. The doctors used words like idiopathic and unpredictable, which were, Min Seok had come to understand, the medical profession's way of saying, we don't know why, and we're sorry, and there is nothing you could have done. There was nothing Min Seok hated more than things he could not control. And grief, it turned out, was the most uncontrollable thing in the world. He visited the grave every Wednesday and every Sunday without exception. His driver knew the route. The groundskeeper knew to leave him alone. He brought flowers, always white chrysanthemums, because Jae-won had once said they were the only flowers that looked like they meant something. And he stood in the silence and he talked. Not to God, not to the air, not to himself, to Jae-won. He talked about the company, about the news, about things that had made him think of his son that week. He talked the way a man talks when he has too many words and nowhere left to put them. He had been doing this for 3 years, and in all that time, he had never once encountered another person at the grave, until the last Wednesday of October. He heard them before he saw them. Laughter, high and bright, the kind that carries through open air without trying. And then a voice, smaller, lower. A little boy's voice, very serious, saying something about flowers. And then a little girl's voice, higher, faster, correcting him. Min Seok slowed his steps without meaning to. He came around the row of stone markers and stopped completely. 2 children stood at his son's grave, small enough that the headstone came to their chins. The boy held a white chrysanthemum, bent at the stem, the petals slightly crushed from small fingers, and the girl was pointing at the photograph embedded in the stone with the focused authority of someone who has explained something many times before and intends to explain it once more. Behind them, a few steps back, a woman stood watching. She was not looking at the children. She was looking at the photograph on the stone, and her face held an expression that Min Seok recognized the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in years. Grief, yes, but the particular kind that has been lived with long enough to become something quieter, something that has learned to sit still. He did not know her. He had never seen her before in his life. But the children were at his son's grave, holding his son's flowers, and that fact rooted him to the spot with a confusion so complete, it felt almost like vertigo. It was the girl who noticed him first. She turned, and she looked at him with the direct, unhurried confidence that children have before the world teaches them to look away. She took in his suit, his silver hair, the flowers in his hand. Then she pointed at the photograph on the stone, and she said 3 words. You are Halmoji. Not Halmoni, grandmother. Not Harabeoji, grandfather. She had the word slightly wrong, the way a child gets a word wrong when they have only heard it and never had occasion to use it. But the meaning was clear enough. Are you family? Min Seok could not speak. He was not a man who lost his words. He had given speeches to boardrooms, to press conferences, to government ministers. He had stood at his son's funeral and delivered a eulogy without breaking. Not because he was cold, but because Jae-won had asked him once, in a conversation neither of them knew was foreshadowing anything, to please not cry at his funeral. It would embarrass him in front of everyone. But 3 words from a child who did not know who he was collapsed something in his chest that he had not known was still standing. He felt his knees. He actually, physically, felt the weight of himself and pressed one hand to the nearest headstone. Not Jae-won's, someone else's, a stranger's, to stay upright. The woman was beside him in seconds. Sir, are you all right? Her voice was low and steady. American English, a southern warmth to the consonants. She put a hand near his elbow, not grabbing, just present, the way you approach someone who might startle. Min Seok looked at her. Then he looked at the children. Then he looked at the photograph of his son on the headstone. At the name, Jang Jae-won, 1989-2020. And then at the children again. The boy had the same line between his eyebrows that Jae-won had always gotten when he was concentrating. The exact same line. Min Seok had looked at it 10,000 times across 31 years. Who are they? It came out barely above a breath, not a question at all, but the only thing his mouth could produce. The woman was very still for a moment. Then, quietly, not unkindly, but with the weight of someone who has carried a truth for a long time and finally sees where it needs to go, she told him. They are Jae-won's children. My daughter was their mother. I'm Sage Dubois. And I think, a breath measured, that we need to sit down. There was a bench near the cemetery entrance, under a ginkgo tree that had just started to turn gold. Min Seok sat on one end, Sage sat on the other. The children, the boy, Noah, and the girl, Naya, ran in small circles on the grass nearby, having lost interest in the adults with the merciful speed of the very young. Sage watched them for a moment before she began. She seemed to be organizing something inside herself, and Min Seok, who had spent a lifetime reading rooms. Let her. Her name was Camille, she said at last. Camille Dubois. She was 24 when she met your son. He was studying in Atlanta, business program, some exchange partnership between Seoul National and Emory. She was finishing her nursing degree. Min Seok listened. He knew about the Atlanta year. He had sent Jae-won there himself, had thought it would broaden him, and it had, though not in the ways Min Seok had imagined. Jae-won had come home from Atlanta different, quieter in some places, louder in others, more certain of himself in ways that had, at the time, unsettled his father. He had not known there was a girl. He had not known because Jae-won had not told him. And Jae-won had not told him because Min Seok understood this now with a clarity that came too late and too sharp. He had known what his father would say. They were together for almost 2 years, she continued, her hands folded in her lap. Still, he went back to Korea. I don't know everything that happened between them. Camille didn't give me all of it. But I know she loved him. And I know it ended. And I know it ended because his family made it very clear, through channels he should have been man enough to close himself, that a future with her was not the future they had planned for him. She stopped. A pause that held 31 flavors of grief. He did what sons do when they are not yet brave enough. He let it happen. Min-seok sat with that for a long moment. He did not defend Jae-won. He could not, because it was the truth, and because the weight of that particular failure now belonged to him too, in ways he was only beginning to understand. She found out she was pregnant 4 months after he left. She tried to reach him 3 times. The last time, someone at his office told her Mr. Jang was not available and would not be contacting her. Sage exhaled slowly, as if releasing something she had been holding for years. I don't know if that was him or someone around him. I genuinely don't know. But she stopped trying after that. Min-seok thought about the assistant Jae-won had had in those years. Efficient, protective, sometimes overzealous. He thought about how easy it would have been, how devastatingly easy, for a message to disappear. He thought about all the things that had happened because of a message that disappeared. The twins were born in July 2020, Sage continued. Camille had a hard pregnancy. She was young and she was alone and she was stubborn, which is a combination that will wear you down. The birth was... Another pause. Longer. There were complications. She held them both. She named them. She told me I was going to be their grandmother, and that I was not allowed to be sad about it. A small, devastated smile crossed her face and vanished. She passed 18 hours after delivery. The ginkgo leaves moved in the wind. Min-seok had been to many funerals. He understood the architecture of loss by now, how it arrived, how it settled, how it changed the shape of rooms and silences and ordinary days. But sitting on this bench in this Korean cemetery, listening to a woman he had never met describe the death of a daughter he had not known existed, while his grandchildren chased each other across the autumn grass, he felt a specific quality of grief he had no name for. All the years that had passed while he sat at Jae-won's grave and did not know. Jae-won never knew. It was not a question. He was already gone by then. He died in October. The twins were born in July. He never... Sage stopped. No, he never knew. So his son had died not knowing he was a father, and his grandchildren had grown their first 3 years of life not knowing they had a grandfather. And Sage Dubois had raised 2 children through infancy and toddlerhood completely alone, carrying the full weight of 2 losses, her daughter and the man her daughter had loved, without once reaching out to ask for help. Why did you come here? Min-seok asked. To Korea. To the grave. Sage looked at the children for a long moment. Naya started asking about her dad last month. She's the one who asks. Noah just listens and takes it in, but Naya asks. She wanted to know where he was buried. She wanted to bring him flowers. And I decided... She exhaled slowly. I decided that whatever happened between their parents, those children deserve to know where their father is. They deserve to be able to come here, to have this. Min-seok said nothing. There was nothing to say that would be adequate. Naya had stopped running. She had come back to the bench and was now standing in front of Min-seok with her hands clasped behind her back, studying him with the comprehensive attention that small children and very wise old people share. You were crying before, she informed him, at the picture. I was. His accent shaped the words warmly, and she didn't seem to notice or care. That's okay. She delivered this with the authority of someone who has thought deeply about the matter, Halmoni cries there too. But she says crying is just love that has nowhere else to go. Min Seok looked at Sage. Sage was looking at her granddaughter with an expression that contained entire volumes. And Min Seok, for the first time in 3 years, felt something shift. Not heal, not close, but shift, like a door that has been sealed for too long, finally admitting a thread of light underneath it. They exchanged numbers before leaving the cemetery. Min Seok suggested it carefully, watching Sage's face for what it would tell him, and her face told him she had expected this and was not afraid of it. She was staying in Seoul for 5 days, a guest house near Insadong, not the kind of place his world usually intersected with, which was precisely why he found himself, 48 hours later, sitting across a table from her at a small restaurant she had chosen, watching her read the menu with the focused patience of someone in an unfamiliar language who refuses to be flustered. The twins were not with her. She had arranged for the guest house owner's teenage daughter to watch them for 2 hours, a transaction she had negotiated with a combination of hand gestures and a translation app that she described with such dry, self-deprecating humor that Min Seok found himself almost smiling. Almost. He had spent the 48 hours between the cemetery and this dinner, doing what he always did when confronted with a problem whose dimensions he could not yet see. He had gathered information. He knew now that Sage Dubois was 58 years old, that she had raised Camille alone after her own marriage ended when Camille was 7, that she had worked for 26 years as a labor and delivery nurse, a detail that saddened him with a quiet, terrible irony before retiring early when the twins were born, because there was no other way to care for them, and she was the only one there was. She lived in Atlanta, in the same house she had bought when Camille was 9, in a neighborhood that had changed around her while she stayed. She had not remarried. She had not, as far as any available information suggested, asked for help from anyone. He understood her, Min Seok thought, better than she might have been comfortable knowing. I want to support the children. He waited until the food had arrived, and the preliminary courtesies had been observed. 63 years had taught him that directness, delivered with appropriate respect, was always better than circumlocution. Financially, whatever they need, school, healthcare, a better living situation if that's... Sage set down her chopsticks. She did it very gently, very deliberately. The way you set something down when you want to make sure your hands are completely empty before you speak. No. He had not expected that. Not the word, and not the absolute quiet certainty with which it arrived. No? Those children are not a debt to be settled. They're not a problem to be managed. I don't need your money, Mr. Jiang. We have what we need. What I came here to give them was a grave to visit and a photograph with a name under it, so that when they're older and they have real questions, questions I can't answer, questions about who he was and where they come from, they have somewhere to start. That's all this was. Min Seok looked at her for a long moment. In his world, in the world of boardrooms and negotiations and the particular social mathematics of great wealth, people said no as an opening position. They said no to see what came next, to see how much you wanted something, to establish a baseline from which the real conversation could begin. He had been refused 10,000 times and had never once taken it at face value. Sage Dubois, he understood with a certainty that went somewhere below logic, did not mean it as an opening position. She meant it because it was true. I understand. A beat, and then, because it was also true. That surprises me. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the structure of one. I imagine it does. Most people. I'm not most people. Not unkind, simply accurate. And those children are not currency. They're my daughter's children, and they're your son's children, and they are going to grow up knowing they were wanted and loved by the people who are still here. That doesn't cost anything. Min Seok absorbed this. He was not accustomed to being corrected. He was not accustomed to someone looking at what he had offered, which, in most contexts, would have been considered extraordinary generosity. and finding it beside the point. He was not accustomed to sitting across from a woman he had met 2 days ago, and feeling, with unusual clarity, that she was seeing him more accurately than most people he had known for decades. It was deeply uncomfortable. It was also, if he was honest with himself. And 63 years had made him, in his private hours, relentlessly honest with himself. One of the most interesting things that had happened to him in a very long time. "What do you want, then?" he asked. "From me? From this? What did you imagine would happen when you came here?" Sage was quiet for a moment. "I imagined a lot of things," she said finally. "I didn't imagine you. I thought you'd be—" She paused, choosing carefully. "I thought there would be lawyers. I thought someone would tell me you were unavailable. I thought the money offer would come with conditions." She picked up her chopsticks again. "I didn't think you'd be the one sitting at the grave." "I'm always the one sitting at the grave." She heard the weight in that. He could see her hear it. "Then that tells me something about you," she said quietly. "That matters." They did not plan to spend the remaining days together. It happened the way things that are meant to happen sometimes do, sideways, without ceremony, through a series of practical coincidences that were not entirely coincidences. The morning after the restaurant, Min-seok sent a car to take Sage and the children to the National Folk Museum, because she had mentioned wanting to take them somewhere they could understand where their father had come from. He did not go with her. He sent a car, and a note, and a name, a young woman on his staff who spoke excellent English and knew every room of the museum by heart, and who had been told only that she was accompanying guests of the family. He expected that to be the extent of it. Instead, Sage called him from the museum courtyard at 11 in the morning. From the background sound, he could hear Noah's voice explaining something very seriously to someone who kept saying, "Yes, yes, tell me more," and Naya laughing with the abandon of a child who has temporarily forgotten to be in a foreign country. "Your staff member told Noah that your son used to come here as a boy." There was something careful in her voice, something that was asking without asking. "Is that true?" He loved it. The answer came before he had decided to give it. The folk village section. He used to pretend he lived in a different century. He had very specific opinions about which house he would have chosen. A silence. "Would you—" She stopped. Started again. "If you're not busy, I know you're busy, but Noah is asking questions that I don't know how to answer. About the houses, about what life was like, and you'd know, I'll be there in 20 minutes. He was there in 15, which was the only answer that mattered. Noah, it turned out, had inherited something from his grandfather that skipped the generation entirely and landed with full force in a 3-year-old. A need to understand how things worked. He wanted to know how the old houses were built, why the roofs curved, how people stayed warm, why the well was in that particular spot. Min-seok answered every question with the kind of patient specificity he had rarely deployed in his personal life, and found that it was, unexpectedly, disarmingly, the most enjoyable 2 hours he had spent in longer than he could calculate. Naya held his hand for the last 20 minutes of the visit. She simply reached up and took it, without asking, the way children take things they have decided belong to them. And Min-seok, who had not held a small hand in his since Jaewon was 4 years old, walked through the rest of the museum courtyard, holding on with a grip that was probably too tight, and said nothing, and looked straight ahead, and was grateful, desperately, surprisingly grateful, for the presence of a tiny person who had decided he was safe. That evening, at his suggestion, they had dinner at his home. Mrs. Park made a feast. She had been informed, tersely, that there would be guests, 2 children and a woman, American, and she had interpreted this instruction with the particular creative latitude of a housekeeper who has watched a man eat alone for 3 years and considers it a personal failure. There was japchae and bulgogi, and a mild dagalbi that she had carefully adjusted for children and for foreign palates, and a dessert that involved strawberries and cream and small cookies that Naya ate 4 of before anyone noticed. Noah fell asleep on the living room couch at 8 o'clock, between 2 decorative cushions, with his shoes still on. Sage and Min Seok sat at the kitchen table, while Mrs. Park quietly washed up and pretended not to be listening. Tell me about him." She had a cup of barley tea in her hands, and the kitchen light made everything warm. "As a boy, as a young man, tell me something I can give them someday." And Min Seok talked. He talked for a long time. He talked about the boy who had refused to eat anything green until he was 9, and then abruptly decided vegetables were acceptable. About the teenager who had learned guitar badly and with tremendous enthusiasm. About the young man who had called from Atlanta one Sunday. Just to call, he had said, just because it was Sunday, and had talked for 40 minutes about a jazz bar he had found, and a city that moved differently than Seoul, and how he felt, sometimes, like he was just beginning to understand what the world was actually made of. Sage listened to all of it. She did not take notes. She just listened, the way someone listens when they know they need to carry something intact for a very long time. When he finished, she sat quietly for a moment. "He sounds like someone worth missing." He was. Camille was too. A silence that was, for the first time, not empty. "I know that," quietly, without reservation. "From everything you've told me, I know that." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he did not look away, which surprised them both. Her flight was early on a Friday. The cab came at 5:30 in the morning, in the dark, while the city was still doing the slow, reluctant business of waking up. Min Seok had not planned to be there. He had told himself he would not be there. He had, in fact, been awake since $3, telling himself this with increasing specificity, until at 5:15 he was standing outside the guest house in the cold with 2 cups of coffee from the place around the corner that opened before dawn, because some habits override logic completely. Sage came out with both children still half asleep. Noah carried in her arms. Naya walking with the solemn determination of a child who has decided that being tired is beneath her. They both stopped when they saw him. Naya, who had inherited her mother's directness and her grandmother's composure in a combination that was going to be genuinely fearsome in about 15 years, said simply, "You came." "I came," he confirmed, "because you didn't want us to go." Children cut through everything. There was no diplomatic phrasing that worked on a 4-year-old. There was only true or not true. "Yes, because I didn't want you to go." Naya considered this, nodded once, and walked to the cab. Noah woke up enough to register Min Seok's presence and reached out one small arm from Sage's shoulder for a hug, which Min Seok gave with a completeness that neither of them tried to make brief. He handed the second coffee to Sage over the top of Noah's head, and she took it. And they stood there in the pre-dawn cold, while the cab driver loaded luggage and the city moved around them. "I don't know how to do this." Whatever this was, whatever it was becoming, he had no map for it. "I don't know what to ask for, or what would be appropriate, or ask for what you actually want." The simplicity of it landed like a correction. "That's what I do. I want to know them. I want to be." He paused. The word felt enormous in his mouth. "Grandfather." Sage looked at him steadily. "Then be that call when you can. Visit if you're ever in Atlanta. Video call on their birthdays. They're in July the 22nd. Let them grow up knowing your face. That's all it takes. And you?" A beat. "What about me? Is there room in this?" He gestured slightly, at the space between them, at the whole improbable structure of what the past 5 days had built. "For more than the children." Sage was quiet long enough that he began to regret asking. Then she tilted her head very slightly, the way someone does when they are deciding something that is already decided and they just need a moment to be sure. I didn't come here expecting to like you. I came here expecting lawyers and conditions, and a check I was going to refuse. I didn't expect... She glanced at the ground briefly, then back at him. I didn't expect someone who sits alone at a grave every week and talks to his son. I didn't expect someone who answered every single question that child had about roof architecture for 45 minutes without once looking at his phone. Min-seok almost smiled. The questions were not unreasonable. No. Her voice was different now, softer, which he was coming to understand was not something she handed out easily. They were not. The cab driver cleared his throat. Sage shifted Noah to her other arm and picked up her carry-on. Call when you can. And Jang Min-seok. He waited. Thank you for coming to the grave every week. For all 3 years you didn't know. I think that mattered, even when no one was watching. She got into the cab. He stood on the pavement until the taillights disappeared. Then he finished his coffee, alone, in the dark, and felt something he could only describe, to himself, privately, in the silence of his own chest, as the beginning of something. He called the following Sunday, because Sunday was the day he visited the grave, and he had fallen into the habit, without meaning to, of narrating the visits. She picked up on the second ring. He heard in the background the specific chaos of a household containing 2 4-year-olds on a weekend morning, cabinet doors, some kind of disagreement about a toy, a cartoon at a volume that suggested the television was being used as ambient noise rather than active entertainment. I'm at the grave. A pause, the kind that carries weight across an ocean. I brought extra flowers, 2 smaller ones, from Noah and Naya. The sound of a door closing. She had stepped somewhere quieter. That's kind. Her voice held the texture it got when she was moved, but not about to make a production of it. They'll want to know that. I thought I could tell them myself, on a call. They'd like that. Tomorrow, in the evening, your time, tomorrow works. And so it began. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, Atlanta time, which was his Wednesday and Friday morning. He was 63. He was awake before dawn anyway. There was nothing inconvenient about it. He called. Noah told him things that seemed unconnected but were always. He came to understand about something important on the inside. Naya asked direct questions and expected complete answers and had, by December, developed a habit of showing him drawings through the phone camera, pressing them flat against the screen with the focused pride of an artist expecting a real critique. He gave real critiques. She loved it. He and Sage talked after the children went to bed. Not every call, not in a scheduled way, but it happened naturally, the way things happen when 2 people have more to say to each other than they had planned. She told him about the neighborhood, about Atlanta winters, about the book she was reading and the television show she had opinions about, and the ongoing saga of Noah's new obsession with trains. He told her about the company, about Seoul, about things that had made him think of the children during the week. He did not say, for a long time, the things that were accumulating underneath those conversations. He was 63 and deliberate, and he understood that the feelings gathering in him were real, but that they required care, that Sage Dubois was not a woman to be rushed or assumed, and that whatever was growing between them would grow at exactly the pace she permitted, and not a degree faster. He was, it turned out, entirely fine with that. He had been impatient his whole life. He had built an empire on the conviction that speed was a form of power. Sitting with this, with the slow, careful accumulation of mornings and calls and small exchanges that meant more than they seemed, was teaching him something he could not have named, but felt was overdue. In February, he flew to Atlanta. He did not announce it far in advance. He told Sage a week before. She said, "You're welcome here." Then, after a short pause, "The couch is comfortable. I'll stay at a hotel. You don't have to. I know. A beat. He could feel her thinking on the other end of the line. Then, guest room it is. And that was that. Her house was not what he had imagined, though he was not sure what he had imagined. It was an older home, craftsman style, he learned. A word that meant something specific about American architectural history in a neighborhood where the trees were old enough to arch over the street. It was warm inside, not warm the way hotels were warm, with their anonymous comfort, but warm the way homes are warm when someone has lived in them long and loved them. Worn wooden floors, bookshelves that had clearly been organized and reorganized over years, a kitchen that smelled like coffee and something sweet, photographs on the walls. He recognized Camille from a school portrait Sage had described, a teenage girl with her mother's composure and a smile that was, Min Seok thought, very slightly her own. Camille at her nursing graduation, in white and blue. Camille very pregnant, laughing at whoever was behind the camera. Two tiny babies, wrapped in the kind of deliberate, careful way that spoke of a grandmother who had spent decades doing this for other people's children and was now doing it, with every skill she had, for her own. Noah and Naya saw him come through the door, and the response was immediate and physical. Noah ran into him at exactly hip height, which was the impact point available to a 4-year-old. And Naya said, Halmoji, at a volume she had not calculated, and flung herself upward in the expectation of being caught, which he did, purely on reflex, with a competence that surprised him. He had not caught a small child in 30 years. The muscle memory, it seemed, had stayed. He was there for 8 days. He took the children to the aquarium. Noah stood in front of the jellyfish exhibit for so long that a staff member came to ask if he was okay, and he was studying them with the specific intensity of a person making decisions. And to a park and to a bookstore, where they were each allowed to choose one book, and Naya chose one with a dragon on the cover, and Noah chose one about trains, and both choices were entirely predictable and entirely right. He and Sage cooked dinner together twice, which required negotiation over the stove because they both had strong opinions about garlic. They went for a walk on the 3rd evening, after the children were in bed, in the winter-quiet streets under the old trees, and talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing, and the particular things that two people talk about when they are trying, carefully, to understand what they are to each other. And I was married for 18 years. Not as information, as a confession. I was not good at it. I was present in the way that a building is present. Large, structural, useful. But I was away more than I was there. And Jaewon deserved more than a father who was always just about to have time. Sage walked beside him without rushing to fill the silence. I was the opposite. A beat, the kind she took when she was choosing exactly how much to give. And I was there every minute. I made Camille's lunch until she was 16 and told me it was embarrassing. I was at every school event. I was so present, I think sometimes I forgot she was a person separate from me. She had to go to Atlanta to find out who she was without me watching. I think that's why she never told me about your son, at first. She was still figuring out what she wanted before anyone else's opinion could get involved. She sounds like someone who knew herself. She knew herself too well, sometimes. She had too much dignity to ask for help. Sage stopped walking. They were under a streetlight, and she looked at him with her face very open in a way he was learning was rare for her. It's something I recognized in you. Min Seok was still. Too much dignity to ask for what you need. You sat at that grave alone for 3 years. He had no response to that. It was entirely true. I don't want to keep doing that. It came out more plainly than he intended. But plain he was finding was the only language that worked with her. Being alone in things. Sage looked at him for a long, considering moment. Then she began walking again. But her arm was slightly closer to his than it had been before. And by the end of the block, The distance between them had closed to nothing, and they walked the rest of the way home in the kind of silence that is not empty at all. He did not kiss her before he left Atlanta. He wanted to. He understood that she knew he wanted to, and that she was not saying no. She was saying not yet, or more precisely, she was saying, make sure, and then come back, and we will see. He made sure on the flight back to Seoul, 30,000 feet over the Pacific, with a business-class seat and 12 hours of uninterrupted thought. He was sure. He was 63 years old, and he had spent his whole adult life being sure about the wrong things, about the primacy of work, about the separateness of professional and personal, about the particular loneliness that he had come to mistake for discipline. And now he was sitting in the dark above the ocean, thinking about a woman who had refused his money without flinching, who had cried exactly once in his presence, and only because her granddaughter said something true, who argued about garlic and returned every email he sent with the same unhurried thoughtfulness with which she seemed to approach all things. He called from the Seoul airport before he even got in his car. It was midnight in Atlanta. She picked up. You should be asleep. I was awake. A pause. He found he could not quite organize the sentence he had composed on the plane, which had seemed very sensible at 30,000 feet and now felt insufficient. So instead, I want to come back in the spring. Then come back in the spring. And I want... He stopped. Started again. He had given speeches to boardrooms. He had delivered a eulogy. I want to know what this is, Sage, between us. I want to... Min Seok. Yes. I know what this is. Her voice was quiet and certain and entirely her. I've known since the museum, when you told Noah about the roof architecture. He exhaled. And I am 60 years old, and I am not going to pretend I'm not afraid of it. But I'm also not going to pretend I don't want it. He sat down on a bench in the Seoul Airport arrivals hall, in his good suit, with his carry-on at his feet, and held the phone with both hands. Then we will be afraid together. That seems manageable. On the other end of the line, Sage Dubois laughed, a real laugh, full and unguarded, not the controlled near smile he had worked so hard to earn in 5 days in October. A laugh like something opened. Get some sleep, and call me on Tuesday. On Tuesday, he confirmed. He slept better that night than he had in 3 years. Children understand more than adults tell them, and less than adults fear. By April, 6 months since the cemetery, 2 months since Atlanta, Noah and Naya had developed a sophisticated understanding of their family's geography. They knew they had a grandfather in Korea, which they called the place where the flowers are, because they had been there in autumn when everything was turning. They knew he called on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They knew he was the person who answered questions about how things were built without acting like the question was too small. They knew, with the particular certainty of children who have been loved consistently, that he was reliably present, and reliable presence, to children who have known loss, is a form of love they can feel in their bones before they have words for it. They knew something else too, because children always do. One Tuesday evening in April, after Min Seok had said goodnight to both of them and the screen showed only Sage, Naya's voice floated in from the other room with perfect timing and no sense of irony. Is Halmoji your boyfriend? Halmoni? Sage's expression on the screen moved through approximately 7 things in about 2 seconds. Min Seok said nothing, mostly because he was trying not to laugh. Naya, Sage called back. Go to sleep. That means yes, Naya called back, and then there was the sound of a door. Sage looked at the screen. Min Seok looked at the screen. Both of them were working very hard to be adults about this. She's not wrong. She's 4 years old. She's very perceptive. She's a chaos agent in princess pajamas. Also that, he agreed. But not wrong. Sage pressed her lips together, which did not entirely succeed in keeping the smile down. No, not wrong. He came back in May. This time he brought them to Seoul. He arranged it carefully, not as a display of resources, though the apartment he put Sage and the children in was beautiful and full of light, overlooking a small garden that was in full bloom. Carefully, meaning he asked what they needed rather than deciding. He asked Sage what the children could handle and what would overwhelm them. He asked what she wanted to see, not what he wanted to show her. He was learning, with effort that he did not resent, the difference. They went back to the cemetery on the first full day. It was different now. The twins were nearly 5. Their birthday was in July, and they were in that particular late stage of 4 that feels like standing on a threshold, everything slightly larger than it was a month ago. Naya laid flowers with a seriousness that was all her grandmother's. Noah stood quietly for a long time, and then said, in the conversational tone he used for his most important thoughts, "I think he would have been good at trains." No one said anything to this. It simply sat in the air among them, true and enough. Min-seok put his hand on Noah's shoulder, and Noah leaned into it slightly. And that was everything. Later that day, at his house, Mrs. Park had made enough food for 12 people and showed absolutely no regret about it. Naya informed Min-seok that she had decided he should move to Atlanta. "Is that so?" "You could have a room. Noah and I talked about it. We would give you the one with the window." "The guest room has a window," Sage noted, not looking up from the glass of water she was refilling. "The big window," Naya clarified. Min-seok looked at Sage. Sage looked at him. Something passed between them that was not quite a decision. It was too early for decisions, and they both knew it, but was the shape of one, the outline, the place where a decision might eventually rest. That's very generous of you," Min-seok told Naya. "I will think about it seriously." "Halmoni says when you say you'll think about it seriously, it means yes," Naya pressed. He looked at Sage. "I do not say that," delivered in the tone of someone who possibly says that all the time. Min-seok put down his fork and laughed. A real laugh, the kind that goes all the way up, the kind he had not produced in 3 years. Mrs. Park appeared in the doorway, startled, and then retreated, smiling, before anyone saw her. The twins turned 5 on July 22nd. Min-seok was in Atlanta for it. He had flown in 3 days before, and he was staying, not at a hotel, not in the guest room, in the house, in the room with the big window, because Naya had been right, it turned out, about quite a lot of things. It had not been a sudden arrangement. It had been a conversation that took place in May, and then again in June, and then again on a Tuesday call that went until 2 in the morning, Atlanta time, and 6 in the morning, Seoul time, during which both of them were more honest than was strictly comfortable and more honest than was strictly planned. What came out of it was not a romantic declaration or a formal agreement. It was something quieter and more durable. A decision to try. A decision to build something at 63 and 58 that they had both, for different reasons, stopped believing was available to them. The company could be managed from a distance for significant periods of time. Min-seok had built it to run well. It was time to let it run well without him in the room every day. He would go back to Seoul regularly. He had obligations, relationships, a grave to visit. But Atlanta had a claim on him now that Seoul had to share. Sage had, characteristically, said very little when he told her this. Then, "You're sure?" Not a question. She did not need the question. She could read him by now. It was an instruction. Be sure. "I'm sure. I was sure in February. I was sure on the plane. I am more sure every Tuesday and Thursday than I was the Tuesday and Thursday before." She had nodded, once, as if this completed something. Then, "The recycling goes out on Thursday." And that had been, in its way, the most important thing she could have said, because it was the language of ordinary life. A door opening rather than closing. The birthday morning was loud. Naya woke first and woke everyone else. This was, apparently, established tradition. And then there was the particular controlled chaos of 5-year-olds and presents and breakfast that became cake because it was a birthday, and different rules applied. Min-seok made the coffee. He knew where the cups were now. He knew that Sage took hers with a little sugar and no milk, and that she needed exactly 1 cup before she was fully present in a conversation. And he had learned to recognize the difference between her still waking quiet and her actual quiet, which were distinct. He handed her the cup. She was sitting at the kitchen table, watching the twins through the doorway. Some elaborate negotiation about wrapping paper was underway, and the morning light was the particular gold of a southern summer, and she looked like herself, completely herself. And he thought, this is the thing I did not know to want, and now it is the thing I cannot imagine not having. She looked up when she took the cup, and she saw something in his face. What? Nothing. Just looking. She considered him for a moment, and her face did the thing it did, that contained private thing that he had learned to read as something other people might have called a smile, but was more than that. It was a yes, a present tense, ongoing, I'm here, yes. Sit down. It's their birthday. We're not allowed to be quiet today. He sat. Naya immediately climbed into his lap without warning or preamble, because this was also established tradition by now, and Noah came and leaned against his arm with a train book that he opened to a page he had been thinking about, apparently, and wanted to discuss. And Sage sat across from them with her coffee, watching, and the gold morning went on around them like something held carefully. He thought about the grave. He still went, and he would always go, but the feeling of it had changed. Not less, not smaller, but different in the way grief changes when it finally finds company. Jae-won had given him these children. Jae-won, through the inexplicable geometry of a love that had been brief and real and ended before its time, had sent these 2 small people and this one extraordinary woman into his cemetery on an October morning and destroyed and rebuilt him in the same hour. He thought about the 3 words. T-U-R Halmoji. A 4-year-old girl with a slightly bent chrysanthemum and no knowledge of who she was talking to, cutting through everything, through grief and pride and 3 years of silence and all the vast, unnecessary distance, and finding, by accident, the exact thing that was true. You are family. Yes, he thought. I am. At last, I am. The following October, on a Wednesday, Min-seok went to the cemetery as he always did. He brought white chrysanthemums, 4 of them now, the 2 smaller ones from Noah and Naya, who were 5 3/4, and had requested that their flowers be included formally, and not just symbolically. Sage came with him. She had not been back since the first visit, had felt, she said, that the early weeks should be his, that she did not want to crowd the space. But the children were in school now, and it was October again. And she had come back to Seoul for 2 weeks. And this time, she stood beside him at the grave and held the extra flowers and was simply there. They stood in the silence for a while. The city moved around them at a distance. The ginkgo trees were turning again, that full insistent gold, leaves coming down in the particular slowness of a windless day. Min-seok placed the flowers. He stood up. He looked at the photograph of his son, 31 years old, permanently, in the frame, smiling in the way he had smiled when he was amused by something he had not expected. I think he would have liked you. The words came quietly, without ceremony. Sage was quiet for a moment. I think he would have been relieved that someone was here with you. Min-seok considered this. Yes, I think that too. She slipped her hand through his arm. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, just the straightforward, matter-of-fact gesture of a woman who has decided something and sees no reason to make a production of it. He covered her hand with his, and they stood like that for a few more minutes. Two people who had come to this place from completely different directions and found, entirely against probability, that they had arrived at the same spot. Below them, in the city, two children were in school learning the names of things and asking questions that their teachers found challenging, and their grandfather, when called upon, answered with great patience and specificity. Above them, the ginkgo trees kept turning, and the world, which had been so irrevocably broken, continued, as worlds do, the slow, extraordinary work of growing something new in the ruins of what was lost. If this story moved you, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Drop a comment below. We read every single one. And share this with someone who needs to believe that it is never too late to find your people.